What you are about to hear will shock you to your core and restore your faith in humanity. At the same time, a young woman was abandoned on a freezing highway in the middle of nowhere by the man she trusted most, her own fiancé. But what happened next will leave you speechless. A complete stranger, a grieving truck driver, became her guardian angel in the darkest moment of her life. This is not just a story, this is proof that miracles still happen, and that sometimes the most broken people become the greatest heroes. Picture this: it's 11:30 at night on Interstate 47 in Wyoming. The temperature has dropped to -15 degrees. The wind is howling like a wounded animal, and snow is falling so hard you can barely see 10 feet in front of you. This is where our story begins, with 24-year-old Sarah Martinez standing on the side of the road in nothing but a thin sweater and jeans, watching the taillights of her fiancé's car disappear into the blizzard. Sarah had been dating Marcus for 3 years. They were supposed to be driving to Denver for her sister's wedding, but what started as a simple argument about directions turned into the most terrifying night of her life. Marcus had been drinking at a gas station earlier, something Sarah didn't know until they were already back on the road. When she asked him to pull over and let her drive, he exploded with rage, screaming that she was trying to control him, that she never trusted him, that she was just like all the other women who had left him. The argument escalated quickly, Marcus swerving dangerously between lanes while Sarah begged him to slow down. When she threatened to call the police, he slammed on the brakes, pulled over and told her to get out. Sarah thought he was bluffing. She thought the man she loved would never actually abandon her in the middle of nowhere in a blizzard. But as she stood there watching his car speed away into the night, the horrible truth hit her like a freight train. She was alone, stranded, and the temperature was dropping fast. Sarah tried calling for help, but her phone had no signal. She tried flagging down passing cars, but vehicle after vehicle drove right past her. Some slowed down, but when they saw a young woman alone on the highway in the middle of the night, they sped up instead of stopping. Fear, mistrust, and the assumption that she might be bait for some kind of trap kept potential rescuers driving past. Meanwhile, the cold was becoming unbearable. Her fingers were going numb, her teeth were chattering uncontrollably, and she could feel hypothermia setting in. This is where Frank Rodriguez enters our story. Frank was a 58-year-old long-haul trucker who had been driving these highways for over 30 years. He was hauling a load of electronics from Salt Lake City to Chicago, and he was running behind schedule because of the storm. Frank was also carrying a weight much heavier than any cargo he had ever transported. 6 months earlier, his 22-year-old daughter Maria had been killed by a drunk driver while walking home from her job at a local diner. Frank had been driving in a fog of grief for months, barely sleeping, barely eating, just trying to keep moving, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering, and remembering meant reliving the worst day of his life over and over again. The police officer at his door, the phone call from the hospital, the moment he saw his little girl's broken body and knew that his world would never be the same. Frank had been driving these lonely highways, trying to outrun his pain, but pain has a way of catching up with you, no matter how fast you drive. When Frank saw Sarah standing on the side of the highway, something inside him snapped to attention. She was small and fragile looking, just like Maria had been, and she was in trouble. Frank could see her shivering from a quarter-mile away, and he knew immediately that this girl was going to die if someone didn't help her. The weather was getting worse by the minute, and hypothermia kills faster than most people realize. Frank had seen enough accidents on these highways to know that Sarah had maybe 20 or 30 minutes before her body started shutting down. Frank pulled his 18-wheeler over and climbed down from the cab. As he approached Sarah, he could see the fear in her eyes. She had been alone on that highway for almost an hour, and she had started to believe that she was going to die. There, her lips were turning blue, her whole body was shaking, and she could barely speak. Frank took one look at this terrified young woman, and without hesitation, he pulled off his heavy winter coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. That's when Frank said the words that would change both their lives forever. "You remind me of my daughter." Sarah later said that something in Frank's voice told her immediately that she was safe. There was a gentleness there, a deep sadness, but also a fierce protectiveness that reminded her of her own father. Frank helped Sarah into the warm cab of his truck, turned up the heat, and handed her a thermos of hot coffee from his dashboard. He didn't ask her a lot of questions at first. He just focused on making sure she was okay, checking her fingers and toes for signs of frostbite, and wrapping her in additional blankets. He kept in his sleeper compartment as Sarah warmed up. She began to tell Frank what had happened: the abandonment by her fiancé, the argument, the terrifying realization that the man she thought she knew had left her to die. Frank listened without judgment, his weathered hands gripping the steering wheel, as anger built up inside him. Not anger at Sarah, but anger at the coward who had put her in this situation. Frank had raised his daughter to believe that real men protect the people they love. They don't abandon them when things get difficult. Frank told Sarah about Maria, about the accident, about how he had been driving these highways for months trying to figure out how to live in a world without his little girl. He explained that seeing Sarah on that highway had awakened something in him that had been dormant since Maria's death. The need to protect someone to be useful, to make sure that no other father would have to experience what he had experienced. Frank realized that maybe this was why he had been put on this particular stretch of highway at this particular moment. Maybe this was Maria's way of telling him that his life still had purpose. Frank drove Sarah to the nearest hospital, where doctors confirmed that she had been in the early stages of hypothermia. Another hour on that highway, and she would have been in serious danger. Frank stayed with her through the night, making sure she was okay, calling her family, and even helping her file a police report about Marcus. The doctor said that Frank's quick action and the warmth of his coat had literally saved her life, but the story doesn't end there. What happened next shows you the true power of human connection. Sarah had nowhere to go. Her relationship with Marcus was obviously over, and she had been living in his apartment with no lease of her own. Frank offered to drive her to Denver for her sister's wedding, and during that 12-hour drive, an unlikely friendship was born. Sarah reminded Frank that there was still good in the world, still reasons to keep fighting, still people worth protecting, and Frank showed Sarah what real strength looks like, not the fake bravado of a man who abandons someone when things get tough, but the quiet courage of someone who steps up when others are in need. When they arrived in Denver, Sarah's family was amazed by the story. Frank became an instant hero to everyone who heard what he had done, but Frank insisted he was no hero. He said that Sarah had saved him just as much as he had saved her. She had given him a reason to believe that his pain could be transformed into purpose, that his loss could become someone else's gain. Frank said that helping Sarah had been the first time since Maria's death that he had felt like himself again. The wedding was beautiful, and Sarah asked Frank to walk her down the aisle, since her own father had passed away years earlier. It was an incredibly emotional moment, watching this gruff truck driver in his best suit, carefully leading this young woman toward her new beginning. Frank later said it was one of the most meaningful moments of his life because it reminded him of all the moments he would never get to share with Maria, but also showed him that love and protection can take many forms. Sarah and Frank stayed in touch after the wedding. They became like family. Sarah would call Frank during his long drives, and he would tell her about the places he was seeing, the people he was meeting, the gradual healing of his broken heart. Frank started carrying a picture of both Sarah and Maria in his truck, and he said that having two daughters to watch over him made the lonely highways feel less empty. Sarah credits Frank with teaching her what real love looks like, not possessive and controlling like Marcus, but protective and selfless. The story gets even better. Frank started carrying extra coats, blankets, and emergency supplies in his truck, specifically to help stranded motorists. He said that every person he helped was a tribute to Maria's memory and a way of honoring the second chance that Sarah had given him. Frank has rescued dozens of people over the past few years, and he always tells them the same thing. You remind me of my daughter, because in Frank's eyes, every person in trouble is someone's child deserving of protection and care. Sarah went back to school, became a social worker, and now spends her life helping people who are in crisis situations. She says that Frank's example taught her that the worst experiences in life can become the source of your greatest strength. Sarah also started a foundation that provides emergency supplies to truck drivers so they can help stranded motorists. The foundation is named after Maria Rodriguez, and it has helped save countless lives. This story spread across social media, and Frank became something of a folk hero, but he never wanted fame or recognition. Frank just wanted people to understand that heroes don't wear capes, they drive 18-wheelers and they show up when you need them most. Frank says that the real heroes in this story are the everyday people who choose kindness over indifference, who see someone in trouble and decide to get involved instead of driving past. The legal aftermath was significant too. Marcus was charged with reckless endangerment and abandonment. The prosecutor said that leaving someone on a highway in a blizzard constituted attempted murder, and Marcus eventually pled guilty to multiple felonies. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison and was ordered to pay restitution to Sarah for her medical expenses and trauma counseling. Sarah said she didn't want revenge, she just wanted justice, and she wanted other women to know that this kind of behavior has consequences. Frank and Sarah still talk regularly, and Frank has become like a surrogate father to her. When Sarah got engaged again, Frank was the one who gave her away at her real wedding. This time to a man who Frank thoroughly approved of after conducting what Sarah jokingly called the most intense background check in history. Frank takes his role as protector very seriously, and he makes sure that anyone who wants to be part of Sarah's life understands that she has people who care about her. The Ripple effects of this story continue to spread. Frank has inspired other truck drivers to become highway angels. Carrying supplies and watching out for stranded motorists, there are now organized groups of truckers who coordinate rescue efforts and who have saved hundreds of lives. Sarah's foundation has grown into a national organization, and the emergency supply program has been adopted by trucking companies across the country. This story reminds us that miracles happen every day, and that they usually look like ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Frank Rodriguez was just a grieving father, trying to make sense of his loss, but when he saw someone in need, he chose to act. That choice to wrap a stranger in his coat and treat her like family changed her lives forever and created a ripple effect of kindness that continues to spread. Sarah Martinez was just a young woman who made the mistake of trusting the wrong person, but her resilience and her ability to see the good in people, even after being betrayed, shows us what real strength looks like. Together, Frank and Sarah prove that sometimes the most broken people are the ones who are best equipped to heal others, because they understand what it means to suffer, and they know how precious it is when someone offers you hope in your darkest moment. The next time you see someone in trouble, remember Frank and Sarah. Remember that you might be the only person who stops, the only one who cares, the only one who can make the difference between life and death. Remember that heroes don't always get recognition, and they don't always get rewarded, but they always get the satisfaction of knowing that they chose love over fear, kindness over indifference, action over apathy. This story should inspire all of us to be more aware of the people around us, to carry metaphorical coats that we can wrap around strangers who are freezing, to see every person in crisis as someone's daughter or son deserving of protection and care. Frank Rodriguez saved Sarah Martinez's life that night on Interstate 47, but Sarah saved Frank's life right back by showing him that his pain could have purpose, and that love never really dies. It just finds new ways to express itself in a world that often feels cold and uncaring. This story proves that there are still people like Frank Rodriguez driving our highways, watching over us, ready to stop when we need them most. And there are still people like Sarah Martinez who can transform their worst experiences into sources of strength and service. This is what real heroism looks like, not flashy or dramatic, but quiet and steady, and always there when you need it most.